college horror channel called Urban Myth chose Ethan Harper to carry their equipment for a shoot at an abandoned apartment on Drummond Avenue. The shoot was built around a legend called the Man at the Door. Perform the ritual at the threshold. Knock 4 times. Don't open the door. What the group didn't know, the ritual script they were using wasn't the version that had been circulating online. It was the original, the one that actually works, the one that requires intent, not accident, not performance, but a list of names composed before the candles were lit. The ritual was performed. The candle flames bent toward the door. The hallway light went out. And in the secondary footage recorded that night, there is a shadow at the base of the door that appears 17 minutes before anyone was in position to cast it. Madison Carter received that footage on Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, her car had been found on Greenfield Avenue. All 4 doors locked from the inside, all 4 windows intact. Now, Brandon Shaw is following something through a decommissioned rail yard at night, because Brandon Shaw has never been afraid of anything he can see. Tyler Brooks has watched the secondary footage 9 times and is starting to ask the right questions about the wrong person. And Ethan Harper, who has been reading American hauntings, urban legends, and the mythology of the modern city for 3 weeks, and has 14 pencil check marks in Chapter 7. Ethan Harper already knows exactly how this ends. The list is irrevocable. The entity doesn't negotiate, only completes. This is The Man at the Door, Part 2. Ethan sat at his desk at 11:45. The secondary camera connected to his laptop, the editing software open, and the footage from Drummond Avenue running on the monitor. His roommate breathed in the deep, uncomplicated rhythm of someone who was not thinking about anything. The room's only light was the monitor's blue-white glow. He had been watching the footage for an hour. He had watched the whole recording twice, the door sequence 6 times, and the 4-second segment before Jason's entrance 14 times. He was certain of what was in it. He had been certain in the apartment, but certainty in a low-lit room, and certainty on a laptop screen with the brightness adjusted, were different grades of certainty, and he had needed the second before he permitted himself to act on it. In the footage, in the gap beneath the apartment door, there were 2 shadows. Jason's was off-center, leaning slightly right, and you could see the small shift in its weight distribution in the second before the door opened. The shadow of a person rising from a crouch to a running position. The second shadow was centered, upright, and it was present from the moment the candles were lit, which was 17 minutes before Jason moved to the hallway. It did not move during those 17 minutes. It stood at the door and waited, with the patience of something that had no relationship to the passage of time. He looked at this for a long moment. Then he opened the message window, attached the clip, addressed it to the group thread, and sent it without a subject line and without a body. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he went to bed and slept, which surprised him slightly, though perhaps it should not have. On Wednesday, the seats in the back left cluster of Professor Langley's seminar were empty. Tyler was absent from the adjacent room. Even the campus coffee shop, where Corey spent most of his mornings on his laptop, held no trace of him. The absence had a texture to it, the texture of a space where people usually are and are not, which is a different quality of empty from ordinary empty. Ethan ate lunch at the window table and read Chapter 8 of American Hauntings, which dealt with the conditions under which a transactional summoning could be revoked. The author's position was that revocation was technically possible and practically near impossible, and that it required the summoner's explicit participation, and that the entity's targets, once designated at the moment of summoning, were formally and irrevocably assigned, after which point the process was largely self-sustaining, in the same way that a physical law is self-sustaining, not because anything enforces it, but because it is simply what happens. He put a small check mark in the margin beside irrevocably assigned, and finished his lunch. On Thursday, coming down the stairs after his afternoon lecture, Jason Reed caught his arm at the bottom landing with a grip built to hold. "Wait," Jason said. His voice had lost its usual loose quality. His eyes had the brightness of sustained fright, the bright, slightly too wide look of a person who has been in a state of physiological alarm for long enough that it has altered their baseline expression. He pulled Ethan into the alcove under the staircase, where the corridor traffic passed without seeing them. "Did you hear about Madison?" Ethan kept his face even. "No," he said. "What about her?" "She died Tuesday night." Jason said it the way you say a fact that you have been saying long enough that the words still feel incorrect, but you have run out of alternatives to them. Her car caught fire on Greenfield Avenue. All the doors were locked from the inside and she couldn't get out. They found her Wednesday morning. He tightened his grip on Ethan's arm slightly. "Did you watch the clip you sent? Before you sent it?" "I edited the footage," Ethan said. "Then you saw what's in it." Ethan looked at Jason's face, which was the face of a person arriving at a realization slightly too slowly to do anything useful with it, and he felt the small, cold thing in his chest that he did not examine. "I should get to class," he said. Jason's grip released. He stepped back, but his eyes stayed on Ethan with a specific quality of attention that had passed through suspicion and was becoming something more focused. Ethan went up the stairs and to class, and sat in the back row, and looked at his textbook for an hour without reading a word. Brandon Shaw had never been afraid of anything he could see, and the distinction mattered more than he knew. He saw the man for the first time Wednesday evening, in the parking lot on Mercer Street, outside the off-campus apartment where he lived with two roommates who were not home. Coming back from the gym, keys in hand, he saw the figure standing under the far streetlight at the edge of the lot, and stopped, because the figure's quality of stillness was the wrong kind. Not the stillness of someone waiting for a car or checking their phone, but the stillness of something that has no reason to do anything else. Brandon stood in the parking lot and looked at the figure for a long time. The figure did not move. He went inside, which was not a retreat. He told himself this, but a postponement, because it was dark and the distance was significant, and there was something about the angle of the light that made the figure's face indistinct in a way that bothered him more than distance alone could account for. He checked from his bedroom window an hour later. The figure was still under the streetlight, in the same position, with no indication that it had moved in the interim. It was there again Thursday morning at 6:40, in the same position, in temperatures that had been below freezing overnight. By Thursday afternoon, what Brandon had been feeling had found the form it always found, when the underlying material was something he couldn't name. He was angry. He was going to go toward the thing rather than away from it, because going toward was what had always worked, because Brandon Shaw was a person who had never yet encountered a situation that did not eventually yield to the application of enough forward force, and because the alternative, sitting in his apartment watching the figure under the streetlight through his window, was something that a person who was afraid would do, and Brandon did not intend to be that. He found the figure on Mercer Street and followed it east. This was unusual. The things Brandon walked toward did not typically walk away from him. And there was something disorienting about the experience of following rather than confronting. About maintaining a constant distance behind something that would not stop and turn. But he read it as a retreat and kept following. And the figure maintained exactly the same distance ahead of him regardless of Brandon's pace. Never closer and never farther. Always at the specific radius where a human shape remains resolvable from the surrounding dark. They went east on Mercer, south on Callaway Boulevard, through the underpass beneath the transit line, where the sound of the trains above filled the concrete tube with a vibration you felt in your sternum rather than heard. And through the forced gate of the old Pullman transit yard, which had not processed an active train in 11 years, and whose tracks had developed a fringe of dead weeds at their edges. Inside, the yard was lit by the ambient glow of Callaway Boulevard and the active transit line above, which cast everything in the orange-gray that is just sufficient for navigation, and not sufficient for anything else. Brandon followed the figure between the maintenance buildings, across the cracked inspection area, to the 3 decommissioned rail cars sitting on the dead-end spur at the yard's far end. The figure climbed the metal steps of the 3rd car and went through the vestibule door, which stood open. Brandon followed. The interior was dark, lit only by what came through the windows, orange-gray, enough to see the rows of damaged seats, the peeling vinyl walls, the debris of 11 years of abandonment. The figure was at the far end, near the coupling door that led to the next car, and it was facing him, and it was not moving, and in the low window light, Brandon could see its face. He had been telling himself for 3 days that the face was not important, that the face was obscured by distance or darkness or the angle of the light, that the failure to resolve it was a function of the environment, and not of the face itself. In the window light of the rail car, close enough to see, he understood that this was not correct. The face was wrong in a way that preceded any category he had available for wrongness. Not disfigured, not absent, but simply wrong in the foundational way. The way a thing is wrong in a dream before you are capable of identifying what specifically is wrong with it. The wrongness that exists below language and speaks directly to the part of the brain that makes the body move before the mind decides. Brandon stepped backward. His foot came down at the angle that narrow aisles sometimes produce, the outside edge of his shoe catching the raised metal strip where the carpet runner met the wall panel, and his ankle rolled. He grabbed the window frame on his way down, caught it with both hands, his upper body over the track outside, his legs still inside the car, and he pulled back with everything he had. He was very strong. He had always been strong. He pulled and his grip held, and he thought for 1 full second that he was going to be fine. The Callaway East Line maintenance transfer ran every Thursday and Sunday evening on the old Pullman spur at 35 miles an hour. A schedule that had been maintained for 11 years without a single incident. Because in 11 years, no one had been hanging out of a window on that specific section of track. Tyler Brooks had all the lights on in his apartment on Ashford Lane, and the secondary footage playing on his editing monitor when Ethan arrived Friday evening, and he had the expression of a person who had been processing information for 72 hours and had arrived at a conclusion he was not finished examining. "You knew," Tyler said when Ethan came through the door. "Not a question." "You should call a woman named Brittany Hayes," Ethan said. "She has a shop on Hartwell Street. She knows what this is." Tyler looked at him for a long time. "Why do you know who to call?" "Because I read about it," Ethan said, which was the most accurate answer available. Tyler called Jason. Jason arrived in 20 minutes. looking like a person who had not left his apartment in 2 days and had found the experience clarifying in all the worst ways. And the three of them drove to Hartwell Street in Tyler's car. With the radio off, the threshold occupied a narrow storefront between a dry cleaner and a Vietnamese restaurant. And its window held a careful arrangement of candles, bundled herbs, and hand-lettered signs, in the specific aesthetic of a place that is serious about what it sells, and uninterested in convincing anyone of that seriousness. Brittany Hayes was behind the counter when they came in, and she looked at the three of them with the calibrated attention of someone who has received many varieties of unusual people and has learned to distinguish between those who have come for the experience of it and those who have come because they have run out of other places to go. She was 43 years old, with close-cropped hair, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent a long time learning to be very careful with her attention. She listened to Tyler's account without interrupting. The ritual, the footage, the shadow under the door before Jason was in position to cast it. Madison's death, Brandon's disappearance, Jason's experience on the stairs. When Tyler finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands flat on the counter. "The candles," she said. "White. Yes. 3, arranged in a triangle at the threshold." It wasn't a question. Yes. And the phrase that was used, "Where did the script come from?" A silence. Tyler looked at Ethan. Jason looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the shelves behind the counter, which held a row of matching black spine notebooks and a collection of small glass jars with hand-labeled contents. And he studied these with the careful attention of a person reading something important. "The script came from someone who knew the original version," Brittany said. When no one answered, she came around the counter and leaned against it, facing them with her arms loose at her sides, in the posture of someone delivering a professional assessment. "Not the version that's been circulating online. The original. The one that works." She paused. "I need to explain something, because most people who come to me with this kind of situation are working with secondhand information. And the secondhand information is usually wrong in specific ways that matter." She looked at each of them in turn, and when her gaze reached Ethan, it stayed there for a moment longer than the others, not with suspicion exactly, but with the attention of someone who is filing something away. The entity this ritual calls is not a haunting. It has no fixed territory, no attachment to a place or a person, no unfinished business in the conventional sense. It is transactional. It operates according to a commission. Someone gives it a list, and it works through the list until the list is finished. "What does that mean?" Jason said. "It means," Brittany said carefully, "that someone told it who to kill. Before the ritual was performed, before the door was knocked, the list was set at the moment of summoning, and the moment of summoning is the moment the phrase was spoken for the 3rd time." She paused again. "The entity doesn't improvise. It doesn't make decisions. It executes. Whoever composed that list composed it before the candles were lit." Jason turned and looked at Ethan, with the expression of a person who has been adding up numbers for 3 days and has finally run the sum one more time and gotten the same answer. Tyler turned and looked at Ethan, with the expression of a person who had been looking at footage for 72 hours and had spent those 72 hours examining everything in the footage, except the person who had been holding the secondary camera. Ethan looked at the shelves. "Can it be stopped?" Tyler asked. Brittany exhaled slowly through her nose. "The summoner can revoke it," she said. "But the revocation has to be voluntary, and it has to come from the summoner, and it requires the summoner to want to revoke it, which is a condition that the summoner may or may not meet. She picked up a pen from the counter and turned it in her fingers slowly, and her eyes were on Ethan's profile. The entity itself doesn't stop until the list is complete. It doesn't make exceptions and it doesn't negotiate. "What's on the list?" Jason said, very quietly. "I imagine," Brittany said. "That would depend on who made it." She gave them what she could give them. A salt circle large enough for 3 people. The specific measurements and the closing method. The conditions under which the circle was effective, and the single condition under which it was not. She wrote this on the back of one of the shop's cards in small, clear handwriting. She told them to call her if anything happened inside the circle. And she said this with the gravity of someone specifying a medical instruction, not the gravity of performance. She looked at Ethan as they were leaving, with the same specific quality of attention she had given him when she'd let her gaze stay a half-second longer than the others. "One more thing," she said, as he was going through the door. He turned. "The entity can see the circle," she said. "It won't cross it, but it can stand at the edge and it can see what's inside it. Don't let that be a problem." They bought salt at the convenience store 3 blocks from Hartwell Street, and drove back to Ashford Lane in the same silence that had occupied the car on the way out. Tyler's apartment was large enough for the circle with room left over, and they poured it carefully, each of them taking a section. And Ethan poured his section with even, precise attention, and stepped inside with Tyler and Jason, and sat down on the floor with his back against the couch. Tyler called Daniel, Madison's boyfriend, who was peripheral to the shoot but not to the universe of the situation, and got nothing, as he had been getting nothing for 2 days. He had developed a theory about Daniel that was not correct, and he had shared this theory with Ethan, who had listened without comment, and had found the theory useful in the specific way that incorrect theories are sometimes useful. The first 3 hours were quiet. Tyler sat with his laptop and watched footage. Not the Drummond Avenue footage, which he had watched enough times, but older footage from the channel. Earlier episodes, the one where they'd investigated the Bellman Road Bridge, and the one where Madison had done the Midnight Cemetery segment that had gotten them their first 100,000 subscribers. He watched these with the expression of someone looking for something they can't define, in a place where they're not sure it exists. Jason sat against the far wall and stared at the middle distance. Ethan read American Hauntings, Chapter 9, which he had not yet finished. At 11:40, the lights flickered once, and went off, and came back on, and the temperature dropped. It was not a gradual change. It was the kind of temperature drop that the building's HVAC system was not capable of producing. 10 degrees in approximately 20 seconds. The air going from the ordinary warmth of a heated apartment to the cold of an outdoor space on a November night. And the cold was not even. It was directional. It was coming from the far wall, from the window side of the room. And when Ethan looked at the window, he could already see that the condensation on the glass had changed. There were no handprints. There was nothing so legible as that. The condensation on the cold glass had simply developed a pattern of cleared spaces that, if you looked at them from the right angle and allowed your visual processing to do what human visual processing does with patterns, resolved into the suggestion of a face. The suggestion of a face at the 4th floor window of a building with no balcony and no fire escape on this side. "Don't look at the window," Tyler said immediately, moving the camera so it faced the interior wall rather than the glass. Nobody looked directly at the window. The cold deepened. The condensation pattern on the glass did not change. Then Ethan heard it. A sound from the window. Not a knock. Not a tap. But a sound like the settling of a building. times 10. A structural sound. A sound the walls made. And then, very close, very clear, in the space immediately behind the glass, the sound of breathing, slow, patient, and entirely without urgency. The breathing of something that was not cold and not tired, and was not hurrying toward anything at all. It breathed on the other side of the glass, and the condensation moved with each breath, and the suggestion of a face in the cleared spaces became less of a suggestion. Jason stood up. He was inside the circle. He had been inside the circle, and then he was standing, and he took 2 steps toward the window, with the particular movement of a person walking toward something they have decided to approach. And then he stopped, and something passed across his face, in the way that weather passes across open ground, quickly, covering the whole surface at once, changing everything. "Jason," Tyler said sharply, "stay in the circle." Jason's eyes were open. His expression was the expression of a person who is present in their body, but is no longer making the decisions about where the body goes. He looked, in that moment, less like a person, and more like a space where a person had recently been. And the vacancy behind his eyes was not the vacancy of shock. It was cleaner than that, more complete, the vacancy of something redirected at the root. "Jason." Tyler reached for his arm and missed. "Jason." Jason walked out of the circle. He walked across the salt line, with the careful, unhurried steps of a person crossing a room for a reason they understand completely. And he went to the apartment door and opened it, and he started up the stairs. Tyler grabbed his camera because Tyler could not grab the camera. And then he followed because he could not follow. And Ethan stood up from the floor of the circle and went after both of them. And on the stairs he could hear the sound of Jason's footsteps going up, and Tyler's voice saying his name, repeating it in the specific cadence of someone who knows the name is not reaching the person it is aimed at. The roof access door opened on cold black air, and the glow of the city spread in every direction. The familiar urban sky with its orange underside and its handful of visible stars. Jason walked from the access door straight to the south parapet without hesitating. The way a person walks toward a destination they have been to many times before, and he stopped at the low wall and faced outward over the edge, his arms at his sides, his head slightly bowed. "Jason." Tyler's voice was barely functional. "Come back inside. Please, come back inside right now." For a long moment nothing moved. The city spread below them, indifferent, and the cold was absolute. And Jason stood at the parapet with the stillness of someone who is not choosing their stillness. And then slowly, against something, against a current that was physically visible in the effort it required, Jason turned his head. He turned it all the way around toward them, fighting each degree of the rotation. And the fighting was visible in every part of him, in his jaw, and his neck, and the tendons in his hands that were gripping the parapet wall with white-knuckled force. He was shaking with the effort of turning his own head, and when he had turned it far enough to look at them directly, his face was the face of someone who is very far away, and can see them but cannot reach them. His mouth opened. "Please." He said it with the voice of someone speaking from the bottom of something, from a depth where sound travels badly. "Please, I don't want to. I'm still here. I can still. Please don't let me." Tyler was saying his name. "Please help me. I don't want to." His hands released the parapet wall. He did not fall. That was the thing that was worse than falling. He did not fall. There was no stumble or slip or accident to it. He stepped backward off the parapet wall, in the deliberate way that a person steps backward when they are directed to step backward. And for one instant, He was standing in the air on the wrong side of the parapet wall. His face still turned toward them, still turned all the way around on the axis of his neck. And his eyes were still there, still him, still looking at them, with the terrible clarity of someone who understands exactly what is happening and cannot stop any of it. And then he was not there. The sound that followed was the sound that comes when a human body meets a surface from 4 stories. And it was completely unlike any other sound. And Tyler was on his knees with the camera on the roof and his hands over his face. And Ethan stood at the parapet and looked down at the sidewalk below for a long moment. And then he turned away and walked back to the roof access door. In the morning, Tyler said he was done. He said it's sitting on the floor of his apartment, his back against the couch, the salt circle still intact around him, the camera on the table, and the apartment full of the gray, early light of a November morning. He said it simply and directly, without performance. The way a person states a fact they have arrived at through a process that is now complete. Ethan told him about Daniel, not the theory, the reality. Daniel was dead, and they would find him at his house on Prescott Avenue. And going there would confirm something that Tyler might find useful in some sense, for whatever useful meant at this point in the sequence of events. Tyler drove. The house on Prescott Avenue was a brick colonial on a quarter-acre lot. Double garage, stone front path. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house had the specific quality of a place that had not been lived in for several days. Mail on the entry table. The particular hum of a refrigerator that has been running without being opened. The garage access door from inside the house was unlocked, and Tyler went through it first, because it was his investigation and his arrival, and Ethan followed, and they both saw it at the same moment. The automatic garage door was in a partially open position, approximately 2.5 feet from the ground, locked there by the motor's safety cycle. After holding that position long enough for the auto-reverse to time out, it was a heavy sectional door, aluminum panel construction, and it had come down across the garage threshold at the 2.5-foot mark, and had not come down further, because at 2.5 feet, there had been something in the doorway. Tyler went back through the access door. Ethan heard him in the hallway, and then heard the front door open, and then heard nothing from the direction of the house for a long time. Ethan stood in the garage doorway and looked at what was in front of him. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen behind him. The November morning was quiet outside the partially open garage door. A car passing distantly on Prescott Avenue. A dog barking at something several houses down. He stood there for a while. Then he went through the access door and down the hall and out the front door. Tyler was sitting on the stone front path, his knees up, his hands hanging between them, looking at the ground, with the expression of someone who has been sitting inside a conclusion for some time. "It was you," he said. "From the beginning." Ethan stood on the path. He said nothing. "The script," Tyler said. "The ritual phrase. Madison didn't know what she was using. She found it somewhere, or someone made sure she found it. And the someone who made sure was someone who knew what the original version was." He paused. Someone who had been reading about it. Someone who had known, before the shoot, what would happen if the correct words were spoken and the door was knocked. He looked up. The reaction in the apartment when Jason came through the door. "I watched you from behind the camera. You backed against the wall. You made the right sounds. Your hands were steady the whole time." Ethan waited. "Was Daniel on the list?" Tyler said. "Daniel knew about the stairwell," Ethan said. "He found it funny. He had suggestions." Tyler looked at the ground between his feet for a long time. A car turned onto Prescott Avenue at the far end and passed the house slowly and continued on. A cloud moved across the face of the low November sun, and the light went flat and stayed flat. "Am I on the list?" Tyler said. The morning was very clear and very cold, and everything in it had sharp edges. And Ethan looked at Tyler's camera bag sitting on the path beside him, and at Tyler's hands, and at Tyler's face, which was the face of a person who has made peace with the question, and is waiting for the answer to confirm or deny the peace. "No," Ethan said. "You never touched me. You never did anything except point a camera." He paused. The list was specific. It was always specific. Tyler put his face in his hands. He sat like that for a long time. And Ethan stood on the path and waited, because there was nothing left to do but wait. And waiting was a thing he had always been practiced at. 2 weeks after Drummond Avenue, the local 6 o'clock news ran a 4-minute segment on 5 Callaway University students whose deaths and disappearances had been reclassified from separate incidents into a connected series. Photographs appeared on screen one by one. Madison, Brandon, Jason, Daniel, and Corey, whose body had been found on Tuesday in a stairwell in the Liberal Arts Building.